Welcome to the Power of Design podcast, where we have inspiring conversations that explore the intersection of architecture, construction, and real estate, so we can understand the dynamics and trends that shape an exciting and powerful built environment. This is your host, Jack Ossa.
Welcome to the Power of Design podcast. I am your special guest host for today, Andy Goh. And if you're wondering where your regular host is, Jack Ossa, he is sitting across the table from me, so fear not. Jack is right here with us. But Jack was kind enough to invite me onto the Power of Design podcast, his own podcast, to talk to him about the podcast because this is the 50th episode of the Power of Design podcast. Again, my name's Andy Goh. I am not just some random person. I actually used to produce the Power of Design podcast. So Jack and I have worked together for several years now. And I'm honored, really honored, Jack, to be here today to chat with you on the 50th episode of the Power of Design podcast.
Awesome. Thanks, Andy. I'm always wanted to have you here on the podcast and what better occasion that the 50th episode of the Power of Design and I really appreciate everything you taught me. I wouldn't be podcasting if it wasn't for you. You were so kind and to use your knowledge and the way you taught me was amazing. I don't think it was a lot of time, but you really showed me the ropes. I told you what I wanted to do, and you said, okay, this is how you do it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, by this, and that, and go ahead. And man, it was amazing. Thank you so much for that push, because I wouldn't be here if it wasn't because of you.
Well, Jack, I appreciate every word of that immensely, but I will caution you that we've got a whole episode here for you to stroke my ego if you want to.
I will.
So, let's not get it all out of the way at first. Jack, I wanted to start off with, a good hard question for you, because that's how I know you like to start your interviews. So tell me, this is your 50th episode of the Power Design podcast. What's the most important lesson you've learned in 50 episodes of podcasting?
Well, I've learned many, many lessons. I will say that the most important lesson is that I can change and I can improve myself. I can really say that before podcasting, I was, one person, and after podcasting, I behaved completely different. My level of confidence have grown big time. I realized how during the first interviews, I was a little bit nervous, and now I feel very confident. The flow of ideas in my mind and in my mouth, what I'm saying, what I'm thinking, it's becoming, really fast. And I feel very happy and confident to see that, the podcast was the playground to really help me take my skills to the next level.
Yeah, and like any great entrepreneur, you're somebody who strikes me as a visionary, as somebody who creates a vision for themselves and then goes and makes it happen. You've obviously done that with your architecture business and many other things in your life, but specifically as it relates to the podcast, when you came to me with this vision of what you wanted to do with the podcast, which you are now living out like to a T, how did you come up with that vision? When did that get inspired for you to start the podcast?
Yeah, the inspiration came from consuming podcasts before. So before I had the idea to start my own podcast, I used to consume 2-3 hours a day of, many other podcasts. And, it's one of those things that after you do it over and over again, I start thinking, well, maybe I should do one, right? Mm-hmm. And when you have a great idea, immediately you convince yourself why not to do it. You get scared, you find reasons, because you want to keep yourself within your comfort zone. Mm-hmm. So I got to the point where I had a business need of, some type of marketing, branding element out there, showing the marketplace my ideas, my thinking, my projects. And I thought, well, maybe the podcast is a good idea to just keep my brand out there.
And just to rewind real quick, this was around the time that you had just started Ossa Studio. That was a new sort of venture.
Yeah, it was probably a year after.
Yeah, so this was kind of launching concurrently with your entrepreneurial endeavor here, because you were working with larger firms like Gensler before that.
Yeah. So, I'm out there in the marketplace trying to, build a firm, do projects, do things. And, just thinking about podcasting, first thought was, man, that's a lot of work. I don't think I'm going to be able to do this. So I had a really good conversation with, Santiago, who is my graphic designer that lives in Colombia. And there was a conversation we had. And we just said, okay, let's just think this through. How will we do it? So, okay, we could do this, we could do that. We kind of plan it out, map it out. How will that work? And we came up with a strategic plan. It was a one-page plan that you saw. And it was very clear, who's the target audience, what the podcast is about. And part of the concept of the podcast was, I didn't want to create a podcast for other architects, which, there are many podcasts about architecture. I wanted to create a podcast about the built environment, all the players involved in creating the built environment.
So not just the architects, but also the contractors, the designers, materials.
Yeah, real estate people, commercial bankers, in order to build something, you need money, and the money needs to come from somewhere. So understanding those players, project managers, brokers, leasing agents, every single person involved in that. Part of that was strategically to get closer to potential clients, because some of those players, will require my services, but also to expand my network. Because now I have a reason to go back to them and, number one, learn about what they do, and also get an opportunity to start developing a relationship with them.
And that's something that we've had a lot of conversations about, you and I personally, when it comes to what the benefits are with podcasting. We've talked before, like, obviously, putting out a podcast is probably not going to make you rich with monthly sponsorships and things like that. But you touched on something that I think is very valuable, particularly for entrepreneurs, is that with this podcast, you've been able to expand your professional network in a way that it seems like may not have been available to you before that.
Oh, yeah. It's incredible. When I want to talk to somebody, let's say a target company or customer I like to get closer to, one thing is to show up and say, hey, I'm an architect, I have this firm, these are my projects, because they get approached by many vendors, so you're just one more. It's completely different to approach somebody and say, hey, we love what you do, we're interested in what you're doing with your firm, would you like to be a guest on the Power of Design podcast? And now they go to the website, they see the podcast, they see 50 episodes, they're like, oh yeah, I want to be part of that. So that's a pure business tool to develop relationships and brand awareness. Is been great. And I start seeing the compound effect now. 50 episodes sounds heavy. I wanted to hit a milestone, and I feel that now. I feel it. It feels really good. The other side is that I'm probably the only person who have listened to the 50 episodes, because I had the 50 conversations. So I learned so much, and it is incredible, because everybody is very nice, open. They share their expertise, they share their experience, and I start seeing a lot of trends. I see key topics that repeat from one person to the other, different industries. So just as a market intelligence, it's a great tool.
You mentioned being or wanting to make the podcast accessible to everybody in the built environment, right? And for our listeners, if this is the first time you've listened to the Power of Design podcast, I tell you to go scroll through the whole archives here, and you'll see, like you said, bankers, you'll see real estate people, you'll see architects, you'll see engineers, you'll see everybody involved with the built environment. That's something that I think you've done a great job of being really intentional about bringing all those voices together. And then, of course, like you said, you get that industry information. I tell this to my clients all the time. I'm like, where else but podcasting could you just walk into a CFO's office or a CEO's office and say, hey, can I get an hour of your time to just chat you up?
I know.
Most places, right, you would get laughed out of the room, right?
I know.
Before you even get in. But if you phrase it as, hey, I've got a podcast and I reach people in your industry, and it'd be really cool to get your insight on some things. All of a sudden, it's just like, oh, you wanted to talk to me for your podcast?
Yeah.
And it's like, it's crazy how it just opens people up and people get so warm to it. So I'm really excited that that's been the experience you've had so far. So tell me, and it's great to build networks, it's great to get information, but what big wins have you gotten from the podcast so far that you're really proud of?
Well, I think there are wins at different levels. One of the things that I realize is, I do the podcast with my own time, with my own money, with my own energy. I'm not making money directly from the podcast at all. And so there is an effort that I'm making, right? There is an effort that I'm putting there every 2 weeks to release this podcast, to give it to people so they can learn, they can understand things. They enjoy the conversations. And when you look at the basic premise that I always talk about, that says life gives to the giver and takes from the taker. I'm giving all this value to everyone for free with my own effort. And it's amazing how that comes back to me. Sometimes have been instances where I meet somebody, let's say at a networking event, they're like, oh yeah, no, I'll follow you. Yeah, I know your podcast. You the other day you say this and that. I'm like, oh my God. Like, when you hear somebody quoting you, it's amazing. And what's interesting is, if they are one of my target clients to do business with, they are ready to do business with me. They're not, I don't need to prove anything. They don't want to check if, I'm legit or something. Like, in their mind, the buying process is already happening. You know how people do business with people they know, like, and trust. I realized that in the digital world, they say they see something on social media and they see my face. They're like, okay, I know his name. If they like the content, they subscribe, they listen to it. And with the repetition and the consistency, you gain their trust. And to the point where I meet them face to face, they're ready to buy. So knowing that process is happening out there, it's mind blowing. That's been one. The other win has been all the relationships that I've been building. After many episodes, not everyone, but some people, they have become my friends. Develop very close relationships. I learn a lot of things about them that any other setting you may have not learned about it. People tend to be open, and and the other win might be just how I see now podcasting as part of my life. I cannot imagine not podcasting now.
Not just part of your business, part of your life.
Part of my life, yes.
So talk about that a little bit more. What makes you say it's part of your life? Because that seems to extend past the business. Like, it's not just part of what you do to market yourself, but it's actually part of who you are and how you express yourself.
Yes. Well, since I started, I set up my cadence. Every 2 weeks I'm releasing a podcast, and I always do it. Like, in my mind, I will not miss that deadline, and I don't miss it. It's always there. And it's just feel like podcasting is part of my life. That's what I do. There is no other way around it. And it's interesting because my children now, they see things in social media, and, I have a 5-year-old, and he talks about the Power of Design podcast. And he's like, oh yeah, I know your podcast, The Power of Design. And it's amazing how, for them it's a big deal. And when they see posts on social media, they see me there, like, well, why? That's awesome. Why is he doing this? That's very interesting. So I think somehow they think I'm famous because they see my face out there. And I'll keep it that way. But it feels that, it's just another layer in my life that I really enjoy. I learned that, it makes me a better person. It makes me a better communicator. It helps me break through, the limiting beliefs or fears that I have. And now I'm very excited to think about now what's the next step, right? So I've been having, crazy ideas about, like, hey, maybe I start another podcast, or maybe it's more about video. So I'm now thinking of, thinking an idea that I might be scared of, and maybe starting over that journey again of embarking on a new adventure.
Well, I love it, Jack, because you really embody so many of the successes that I really try to preach to my clients. And I'm sorry for our listeners, that's the business that I do. I own my own full service podcast production and consulting company. Jack was one of my very first clients, and I help people put together their podcast when they don't, know how to do it. And I always try to stress to them that it's that I really don't want them to be getting into this thinking they're going to make a bunch of money, right? Or thinking that you're going to be taking home $1,000 every month from your sponsor or something like that. Like, I really don't want people to quantify success in podcasting along those lines. I love the way that you've defined success for yourself, because to me, that's much more tangible.
Oh, yeah.
It's more rewarding for you, like just spiritually, like that, fills you up. It makes you gives you energy for the day and things like that. It expands your network. Like you said, that of course, networking is going to only result in more business, more opportunities, more visibility. It's helped you become a better communicator, which I know that's something that obviously you've worked on since immigrating to the country.
Sure.
Probably the whole time. So those are all like really big wins that to me are just as, if not more tangible than, money itself. So of course, let's not kid around, like those extra networking skills and whatnot, that helps bring in new business, and that's where the real money is. But all those other big wins, the self-gratification, the realization and everything else, I feel like that's just as big of a win as anything.
100%, man.
All right. Let's also rewind a little bit for our listeners too, because I don't know if you've ever talked about yourself on this podcast. What it is that you do.
Yeah.
And so let's start there. Like, we've talked about your podcast, Power of Design podcast, and how it helps, feed into your business, Ossa Studio. Tell us, what is Ossa Studio?
Ossa Studio is an architecture and brand design firm. So we help people create impactful experiences through the power of design. I think one of my life themes is the power of design. What is design? How do you apply it to business, to your own life, to anything you're doing? So, within the architectural world, we develop mainly commercial projects, a lot of office, adaptive reuse, renovations. And in the brand design world, we develop, brands from scratch, brand identities. And then we also venture into, web design, digital marketing strategies, and also brand consulting, where we help people clarify what's the unique differentiator they bring to the marketplace.
What for our listeners here in Charlotte, what are some key or signature projects that you've worked on around town that you could drive around and say, that's a Ossa Studio design?
Sure. So last year, we finished our first full building. It's called Cunningham Recreation Headquarters. That's a company that develops and builds playground equipment nationwide. So we designed their offices in all Pineville and Tybola. So that's a project I'm very proud of, because we competed against larger firms. We won the project, and the design was very impeccable since the beginning, and it was a special project because I felt I gained the trust of the client early on. So everything I designed, they loved it immediately, and they never changed anything. And if somebody was gonna make a change, they said, "Oh no, you need to ask Jack." So I think you could really see the trust that the client had in me was. You can see that in the end result. You can visually see the design reflecting that relationship during the design process.
Wow, that's such an ethereal way to put it. The trust the client had in you, it was reflected in the final product. That just gives me chills, honestly, because yes, it's one thing to put out together great work, but it's also something else to work greatly together to build something greater than you could have on your own. And it sounds like that's exactly what you're doing. It's unique too that you mentioned that it's not just architecture and design, but also branding and some graphic design and things like that. And full disclosure, you created my website, gohjostudios.com.
That's
you
right.
created my branding, the really cool GS logo that my company now uses and is in the process of trademarking.
Nice.
You designed all that, and I consistently get a lot of compliments on all aspects of that. But my question is why the diversity there? Why not specialize in just architecture and design, or why not specialize in just the branding and marketing?
I can talk about like an hour about this, but I'll try to summarize. I think, as an immigrant coming from another country, there are a lot of benefits and things that I love and I like about, this country. I'm a USA citizen now. I vote. This is where I'm raising my family. But there's some key difference between, what's United States and what are other countries in, let's say Europe and South America. And, one of the biggest things we have here in the United States is, that the industrialization, the mass production, standardization, amazing projects being done, organization, project management, our roadways, sending people to the moon is like, that's not easy to do, man. That's a lot of work and thinking, and it's amazing all the benefits we get out of that, mm, technology, manufacturing. But I think there is something that happens when to achieve that. You typically need to start creating, teams, compartmentalizing knowledge, where people specialize on something and then you become good at it, and then maybe you don't need to venture too much about doing something else. So during my most recent experience as an employee, where I was working, I was working at a large architecture firm, and then you start kind of defining what your role is. So if you're a project architect, you only do this task. If you're a project manager, you do this. If you're a designer, you do that. And I understand the concept of specialization and why it's there and gaining expertise. However, I was very uncomfortable with that. I will do it, but I always felt, well, I like to do this other task. I feel that I have the talent, or I would like to try it. So I realized how most of the progress, especially in corporate America, grows out of limiting people's potential.
Limiting people's potential. So you think corporate America intentionally does that? Or at least the system is kind of
Yes.
set up to feed people in that
Yes,
system.
because we have heard this phrase many times, like, oh, you're stretching out too thin. Don't try too much. And I understand when you try to do too many things, I got that. But if you look at a basic human being, when you're born with your brain and your heart, and if you're healthy, you can do many things. Our brain is an incredible machine. We can learn so many things. It's ridiculous. And to me is when you believe that you cannot do something, then you don't do it, right? So part of my frustration was that limitation, right? When I start my own business, I start doing marketing, sales, accounting, business development, designing, construction documents, construction administrations. I like branding. So I felt like a liberation, and now I can go and play in that playground and play all the games I want to play. And there's some that I'm not very good at. So eventually I will need to, scale back. But there's nothing wrong with trying that. One of the biggest things and breakthrough has been, I was never in corporate America, I was never in a role of designer, right? To the point where I started to believe that I was not a good designer.
But it wasn't because you weren't a good designer. It was simply because you
it
weren't
was
in the right
because the
place to do
system
it.
is like that, and they say, no, these other people are the designers, you are not. And I'm like, oh, wow, maybe I'm not seeing something. I thought I was a good designer. And now when I start my business and I need to design these things and I don't have designers, then I have to do it. Then I start doing it. People I'm like, oh no, I'm a great designer. And when I start believing it, then I start designing better. So there are all these little things that creating design in many different arenas is helping me expand. So, going to brand design, going to brand consulting, I try it. And if I'm really bad at it, I'm like, okay, I try it. But if I don't produce a good product, the marketplace is not going to pay for it.
Right.
So that's my measurement to understand how far should I go pursuing my interests.
So from what I'm hearing from you is a lot of it comes down to this just unshakable belief you have in yourself that you can do this no matter what other people can say. It's also a willingness to experiment and a willingness to fail, which is certainly not something that most people are given room to do, particularly in corporate America. And then it's also the idea that if you extend yourself, you'll learn and you'll improve yourself down the road too. So it's like three things that I'm hearing from you,
Sure.
like that drive that. That's really impressive. And again, that's not an attitude like you just come across every day, which is just even in the entrepreneurial world sometimes. So that's really exciting to hear about that. I want to ask you about something that we talked about briefly when you first started the podcast, and I think it was probably a little bit on your mind, but it seems like you've gotten over it pretty well now. And that was using your accent in your podcast. And I remember you had some reservations about speaking fully with your native voice when you started.
And I think goes back to a lot, all of us having to be sometimes too hard on ourselves. We kind of see our weaknesses or our problems through a magnifying lens, and we think everybody sees that, and people don't really care. So I was always very concerned about my accent, and when I was gonna start the podcast, I was concerned about, well, maybe people are not gonna understand it. Who's gonna wanna listen to my voice, because I don't think it's very pleasant. But that's the reason why I started. I said I need to push myself, and I'm gonna do it in a way that makes me feel uncomfortable, but I'm just gonna be uncomfortable. And it's been amazing because I went over that. Now I'm not concerned.
Right.
And I'm not concerned because I have proved that, people understand me. No, maybe they still don't, but I don't care anymore. Right?
There we go.
I don't care anymore. If they don't, well, okay. Well, I did my best, and I'm gaining a lot out of this, so that's fine. The other part of that is been really good to me mentally has been trying not to be a perfectionist, because I am a perfectionist. And sometimes I say things, that are wrong, or I mispronounce something. I don't care anymore. Somebody's gonna listen for a silly mistake for 1 second. Just keep going. Maybe the beginning I wanted to stop and edit that part. I don't care anymore.
There you go.
I might explain it later, and I just keep going. And that mindset has been translating to my work. Sometimes I realize I've been gaining a lot of speed with my work, because I'm more concerned about keeping the ball rolling, communicating with the client, getting feedback, than getting a perfect product from the beginning.
Wow, there are lots of lessons to be digested in that, particularly just this notion of getting it done, and getting it done authentically, and prioritizing that over getting it done right.
Yeah.
Like that's not something that we normally run into in the corporate world anymore. It's like, you got it done right. It's a results business. Hey, we're glad you're here, and we respect you as a person. But at the end of the day, it's about getting it done right. But you take the exact opposite approach. Seems like you revel in your authenticity and who you are. And when you bring that to the table, it seems like the people that you work with recognize that and respect you more because of it. Just from an outsider's perspective, it seems like that's what's happening.
Yeah, I think in general, one of the things I've realized in my evolution podcasting, now I feel very relaxed. Like, talking to you right now, I don't care if there is a mic or not. And even now, I wish I had a mic recorder with me all the time, because I'm having great conversation. Like, man, this should be a podcast. And sometimes, I wish, since most of my podcast revolves about, the business world, sometimes I wish they were a little bit more relaxed, and it's hard to, go through a process where people relax in 30, 45 minutes that you do a podcast. And sometimes some of the conversations might get a little stiff. I think sometimes people think everybody's listening to the podcast, everybody at their company, all their family, and they're very careful about what they're saying. And it's not that relevant. It's not everyone is gonna listen to it. And the best feedback I have received was when people get vulnerable, they share things, they share their experience. I get a lot of good feedback when people talk like that.
That's great, man. I mean, I really love that the emphasis there is on just being yourself. I mean, pretty much the people that we work with, we're all talented, we're all smart, accomplished, whatever else. But I think that we're seeing a renewed emphasis on that authenticity and being genuine in your business dealings. And I think people
Yeah.
are realizing that it's more important to work with somebody that you like working with, that you respect, that you vibe with, that you can have that human connection with, than it is to just work with whoever the best is or whatever the case may be. This work has to be fulfilling too. It can't just be all about the results.
That's right.
We're going to take a quick break here on the Power of Design podcast. We're going to come back and talk about Jack's upbringing in Colombia, where he, of course, developed the wonderful accent that we've just discussed. So we're going to talk about his journey to America as an immigrant, and then also start, getting an education in architecture, working for some of the top firms here in Charlotte, North Carolina, and eventually starting his own business. So
That's right.
Lots more to talk about here on the Power of Design podcast.
We'll be right back with more from the Power of Design podcast.
The Power of Design podcast is brought to you by Ossa Studio, a multidisciplinary design firm focused on creating impactful experiences through the power of design. We partner with our clients to create buildings, interior spaces, brands, and strategies that help you deliver a successful project. As a minority-owned firm, we are committed to building a diverse platform of curious and driven design professionals so we can together pursue our full potential. For more information, please visit us at www.ossastudio.com.
We're back on the Power of Design podcast. My name is Andy Goh. I'm the owner and founder of Gohjo Studios, a full-service podcast production and consulting company, and the one-time partner of Jack Ossa and Ossa Studio of the Power of Design podcast. Jack, good to have you back.
Good to be here.
Yeah, definitely. And in that first section of the podcast, we really talked about your experience podcasting. And, I'm sure that was a treat for our listeners who've been listening to all your episodes to actually hear more from you, about how your experience has been. Of course, this is the 50th episode, great milestone to kind of take a step back and look back at the things you've accomplished and how far you've come. But I'd also love to give your listeners a little sense of just who you are as a person. And of course, I don't think you can tell your story without mentioning the fact that, you were originally born in Colombia and immigrated to the U.S. And have, built a career from those humble beginnings. And
Sure.
that's a fairly unique story, I would say. So let's go back to the beginning. Let's talk about Colombia. Tell me, in growing up in Colombia, when was the first time? Well, let me start here. What were your earliest memories of Colombia? Just some of the things you remember as a child about the place you grew up.
Playing with my brothers. I have two younger brothers. We're three boys, and I remember playing with them all the time. We're 2 years apart.
Mm-hmm.
So I always felt that I grew up with friends because, we were so close that, we kind of live stages of life together, and it was always super fun. Like, we may have friends in our neighborhood, but just being in our home, that was plenty because, with the three of us, we always, play a lot of games, come up with things to do. And
Y'all were close in age, it sounds like?
yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And then I also remember my parents. So we live in Medellin and then Bogota, which are two big cities. But my parents, they grew up in the countryside of Colombia. And, they both grew up in agricultural homes. Very large families working in farms. They moved to the cities. That's where we grew up. But I always remember going to vacation in those farms. Like coffee plantation farms. And these beautiful, farming areas, mountains, very green rivers, playing with nature. So that, those are the first memories that I always got when I think about that.
So your family was real blue collar, right?
Oh, sure.
Yeah. That's great. When tell me this. Obviously, Colombia unfortunately has this stereotype that seems to hang around it because of the drug dealers and all that sort of stuff. We know that that's not the whole country, especially these
Sure.
days.
Yeah.
So if we were to come with you on a trip back home to Medellin or Bogota, what would you show us? What would we see? What would the experience be like?
It will be architectural related for sure.
No, we gotta get that part of the tour.
That's right. Yeah. Even now, all my vacations with my family are based on architecture. My kids are like, "Look at that building, Dad."
You kids
But
are
yeah,
into it?
yeah, but
Okay.
yeah, we'll do that because with architecture you could see history, you could see new things, you can see parks, landscaping. So I will make a list of let's say we're going to Bogota, and I will select maybe depending on the time, 3, 4, 5 buildings.
What's one signature building that can't miss in Medellin?
I will say in Medellin.
In Medellin, Bogota?
Well,
either.
in Bogota, I will say Torres del Parque. It's a high rise. Everything is made out of brick. That probably was built. I don't know, probably 1960s, and it's a beautiful organic shape. Yeah, so it's like it goes in circles, and it rises up. I don't know how many levels, maybe 40 levels.
Sure.
But everything is brick, so they use every single piece of brick to start creating like a Lego type shape. But it's organic, so it's all about carbs. It's beautiful. So yeah, the modernism was very, very influential in Colombia. But what was nice about it is that modernism is usual came from Europe, and it was very very characterized by the use of concrete and white. So there was like these huge white boxes. But in Colombia, because of the the country and the soil, the brick is more common. So the brick is the adobe is the material that you use. So they took that vernacular material and apply it to modern shapes and created this beautiful like vernacular modern architecture.
That's gorgeous. Just getting some pictures of that warm adobe brick in the sunlight. I can imagine that being a very breathtaking scene. When did architecture first enter your life or your consciousness as a passion?
It was later on in life. When I finished high school, I actually started in engineering school. I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I was growing up, I always like putting apart toys and electronics and things like that. So in my head, I was like, oh, maybe this is like an engineer. Maybe I'll do that. So I started in engineering school, and I was 16 years old when I started, and it was horrible. Man, it was like calculus and algebra every single day,
a lot of equations,
like 8 hours a day, and I was like, "What is this?" Man, it was 6 months of my life, and got to the point where I just couldn't take it anymore. I was like, "I don't like it. I don't fit here. This doesn't make sense." But I felt bad because my parents were paying for it. But one day I just talked to my parents and say, "Hey, I'm sorry. I don't know where to go with this. This is not what I thought it was gonna be. I'm not good at it. My grades are horrible. I don't enjoy it." And my parents, they're such an amazing pair of people. They said, "You know what? That's okay. Take your time. You wanna take a break, a couple of months, go take some English classes or do something. Figure it out, and maybe next year you start over again and select something else." And during that break is when I met a friend. She was walking, going to her house, and I ran into her, and she was holding an architectural model. So I saw that, and I was like, "Man, what is that?" And she said, "Well, I'm studying architecture, and this is a model." It wasn't exactly a building. It was very conceptual. And I said, "What is that?" I said, "Well, this is, we're studying, concept designs and concepts in design, harmony, balance, hierarchies, equilibrium. And she started showing that to me. I was like, oh my God, yes, I want that. So I said, okay, where do you go to school? And I made, I made the list, where is the address? And next day I just went there and signed up.
Wow. How about that?
Yeah.
That is really cool. And what's cool about that is that it wasn't like love at first sight, right? It wasn't like you were like, oh, wow, engineering and stuff. Like, I just love this. But it took almost a happenstance event.
Yes.
This kind of random running into a friend who just happened to be carrying this thing that sparked that interest and that love. That's, I don't know what to call that, but that's really cool.
I know.
So you signed up the next day. By the way, I love just the no hesitation move there.
Right.
Just go in and sign up. And that starts you off in architecture school. So tell us about those steps in your education. You go to architecture school in Bogota.
Yeah.
And you get your degree from that school. And then when does the idea to immigrate to the U.S. start to?
Yeah, so I started architecture school, and it was an interesting journey because, my concept about what architecture is keeps changing. And I think up until today, when I think I figured out what it is, I get a deeper understanding of what architecture is. So I went through school, and, during your classes, you start studying, the history of architecture. You start looking at, contemporary architects, understanding how people think and design worldwide. And then I started looking at, all these amazing projects and architects in Europe, in United States, with different materials, different look and feel that what I was used to in Colombia. And that was, I remember when somehow that idea of going somewhere else to practice architecture started becoming a dream in my heart and in my mind. So I got to the point where I started, during the last years, I started labeling my plans in English. Nobody was doing it. People thought I was crazy, but I was like picturing myself working somewhere in English.
So you knew that staying in Colombia may not be the end all be all for you. When did you first come to the United States, and how did you begin the naturalization process?
Yeah, so I came after 2011. I remember I had purchased my tickets.
That's only 10 years ago.
Yeah. September 11, 2001 was that. Yes. Sorry. Yeah.
Okay. Never mind.
September
So that's
11.
20 years.
20 years.
Okay, 20 years.
So I remember I had my tickets, and then the Twin Towers fell.
Sure.
And I had my tickets with me. I was like, oh my God, where am I going?
Welcome to America.
Yeah. So, but I was ready to come with my
Sure.
younger brother. So my younger brother graduated from high school. My other brother, who's in between us, he stayed in Colombia, and I had just graduated from architecture, and we just came here. So we came with $3,000. We went to Atlanta because my cousins live there, so they received us in Atlanta. We were there for a couple of weeks, and then we came to Charlotte to visit another cousin that was living here. But the idea was that we were gonna come for a weekend. But after that weekend, after we saw the city, I told my brother, we're not leaving. And he said, you're right, we're not leaving. So that was 20 years ago. We never left.
Oh, wow. That's amazing.
Yeah.
So you get to Charlotte. I'm assuming you have to, find some sort of, introductory housing. You probably have to find some sort of job. What were those first few months, year or two?
Yeah.
Like
So
here?
the first week, we stayed with my cousin, and we had $3,000 total. So, after the first day, I woke up early. I started looking for a place to live. Found a place down Sharon Lakes, an apartment complex, and I rented an apartment for 3 months. I paid 3 months in advance, and then we started walking South Boulevard, and we bought a car for $1,000.
Wow.
So in 2 weeks, we had a place to live and we had a car. I mean, we had no furniture, no computer, nothing, but at least that was our apartment. So what we did is started walking and going to stores and asking for jobs. saying, hey, I'm looking for a job. I didn't know much English. My younger brother knew more because he was going to bilingual school in Colombia. So we started looking for, any job you could find. So my brother found a job in construction, doing drywall and framing. And then a Colombian friend that I met here found a job and took me with him to clean windows for, homes where they finish new home developments. You have to clean the windows. So I will just clean windows all day long for like 5 cents per window. So that was my very first job. And then we went to another of my friends here in Charlotte, and he introduced me to his insurance agent. And it was this lady from Venezuela, and she worked at a restaurant. And she said, hey, I work at these restaurants in the afternoon. If you guys want to find another job, maybe I can introduce you to the owner. They're hiring waiter and busboy, things like that.
And real quick, at this time, you had your architecture degree.
Oh, yeah.
And like you were wanting to be like you had it in mind that you wanted to work in architecture, that you weren't going to be satisfied with just like labor jobs.
Yes.
But you were taking them because you had to.
Yes. And when I came, I had my tourist visa, which allows you to be in the country for 6 months. But you basically you cannot work. So those jobs I was doing, it was basically illegally.
It's all under the table.
Yeah. So I found a job at this restaurant and started to work as a busboy. And then I started researching about how do I practice as an architect here. So talked to an immigration lawyer and learned that I needed a working visa as an H-1B. And it was like $3,500, which I didn't had. And I just needed to find somebody to sponsor me to do that. So during those 6 months, I started working at the restaurant, very hard. And on my days off, I ripped 3 pages from the Yellow Pages phone book at the restaurant with all architecture firms in Charlotte. And I will go and show up and at that firm on my days off and say, hey, I'm looking for a job. And they're like, okay, do you have a resume? I'm like, what is a resume? I had no idea. I didn't know how to apply for a job. But I started going to many places, and I will carry my portfolio work. I always like technology, since the beginning of my architecture career. So I had a lot of CAD drawings and renderings, things like that. So I will show up with that. So I have one small architecture firm in South Boulevard here. One of the architects say, hey, let me see what you have. And they asked me to come for an interview 2 weeks later. At that point, I had been in the country for about 3 months. So if my tourist visa expired, I will be what's called out of status, like completely illegally in the country. And I was not willing to do that because I went to architecture school. If I cannot be an architect, I will go back to Colombia. So the architecture firm called me. I had an interview, and that was one of the hardest sells of my life, saying, hey, I don't know, I'm not only need a job, I need a working visa, which is $3,500, which I don't have. And you have to sign like these, 500 pages documents with immigration saying that you're responsible for me in the country. And they said, why don't you come for a week? We give you some tasks. Let's see how you work. You see how we feel. No commitment, just to kind of check. We don't know how to check your references or anything. So I said, okay, I'll do that. So that was the craziest week of my life because I was at the restaurant and I will have to, mop the restaurant. I had to clean toilets. I had to bake bread. But then I will go in the morning and they will give me, some floor plans, and I was just in the computer working like crazy, man. That computer was on fire because I said, this is my chance. So I did that. I worked there for about a week. And they said, well, we'll let you know, we're going to meet and we'll tell you. And about a month before my visa expired, I got a call from the lawyer I met with. And the lawyer said, hey, this company just called me. They want to hire you. And they just paid for your working visa. You start next week.
Wow. How did you feel after getting that phone call?
Oh my God, that was crazy. I remember that phone call like if it was yesterday. I remember what I was wearing, where was I. First thing I think was to call my mom and my dad, tell them, hey, I got a working visa. I'm in the United States. Man, that day was amazing because I felt, man, I did it. It was a strange time, but it was very interesting because I remember I had to work very hard. They paid me very low. I had to clean toilets. People will puke, but I was gladly doing that because I felt that I was one step closer to my dream.
That's an example of, to me, just a work ethic that is in short supply these days. Not everybody is willing to sacrifice in that way. Although, and I know that for you, you didn't really have a choice, but you were also determined enough to say that this is going to happen, or it's just this or bust. And, the humility and the dedication to take those lower paying jobs to ask a random stranger for $3,500.
Yeah.
So you can get hired, so you can get more money. That's a lot of swallowing of pride that, you have to be really dedicated to your ultimate vision to really live that through and see that through, man. So that's really exciting. But so you got the job at this firm. How long were you with that? I guess started this period where you worked with other larger firms here in town on several different projects. Tell me about how that was, because I know as an entrepreneur, we start businesses to kind of do things our own way.
Sure.
Tell me about your experience working with the larger firms in town.
Yep.
What you learned from that, and what lessons you're bringing from that to your own business.
Yeah, so I started working at this firm. It was a small firm doing very diverse type of work, and it was amazing. I learned so much. All my foundation as an architect, I think I got it at that firm. And the other thing that happened during that time, about 2 years later, was that, remember the insurance agent, that Venezuelan lady that helped us find that job at the restaurant. Eventually, I marry her, so she's my wife today.
Oh, whoa,
Yeah,
no
so
kidding. I didn't know
we've been
that.
married 16 years.
Oh,
Yeah.
I did not know that at all.
Oh, yeah.
Wow. How about
So
that?
man, that was huge, because I think I made it up to that job, and then after that, it's been a team effort, because she's always been encouraging me and showing me the path and helping me see beyond my own limitations. So she's always looking at what's the next step for me, and asking me if I'm doing my best, and giving me options and pushing me. And I'm so thankful that she does that, because I wouldn't be here if I wasn't because of her. So I worked at that firm for about 4 years. And then it was a good transition, because then I transitioned to a larger firm doing national projects, doing better things. And then during that time, that was probably 2008, it was the downturn, so the firm I was with, it was like 46 people when I started. In 2009, we were 6 people. So I could see, I saw everything, face to face. My wife was laid off where she was working. She was pregnant. My salary got cut to 60%. We really lived the whole thing. But I was one of the few architects they left at that firm, because I was very helpful, for any firm, because I could do marketing, I could do construction drawings, I can sell, I can do renderings. And it got to the point where unemployment rate for architects was like 80%. There were no jobs. Wow. It was horrible. And my wife always asked me, hey, you need look for another job. I'm like, how am I going to look for another job if nobody's hiring? That was 2009. And she bothered me so much that I said, okay, I'm going to go online and find a place and apply, so you're happy. And I apply at Gensler. And I didn't even know Gensler had an office here in Charlotte, largest architecture firm in the world. Sure. Well, long story short, I got an interview. It went great. They hired me, and I started there in 2010. So it was a great progression, because I went from a small firm to a mid-sized firm, national, now going to a global firm, to really learn the business of design. And it was amazing, during that time, we had 2 other children, and my dream of having my own firm started kind of diminishing, because when you work at a place where you're well paid, you have good vacations, good benefits, you're doing amazing projects, international work, you travel. I said, well, I made it. That's it. That's the end. That's the end of the journey. American dream, check.
Right. Yeah. You could have just checked
but
out.
For
right
some
there.
reason, man, I was not fulfilled. it was just I've started to feel ungrateful. I was how come I'm not happy if I have everything I wanted? But it was something like bubbling inside me that it kept thinking. I talked to my wife, and my wife is like, "You need to leave. You need to start your own business. You need to leave." I'm like, "Well, but we have it. How do you do this?" And you start thinking about money and all those things. And you know what I'm talking about because you went through that. Up to the point where I said, "You know what? No more excuses. No more excuses. That's it." And my excuses was, no, I have one child. No, I have two. No, I have three. I'm like, I shouldn't be using my kids as an excuse. They should be my motivation to do it. So in January 2017, I left the farm, bought a computer, and started my own business, man. And, it's been amazing. What's interesting is that I feel starting my own business it has been very similar to coming to America the first time, doing something new, taking the risk, not knowing many things, trying again, trying to learn to be accepted, trying to understand the system. It's the same process over again.
That's amazing. And, again, like you mentioned, I'm a fellow entrepreneur myself. So I see what you're doing, as very much in the same spirit as what I try to do. We've worked in these, bureaucratic organizations, and we've learned from the tops in our industries, and we've, been able to have some success there. But now, like, you're right. You, like myself, I've got this desire to do something more than what those places can provide, really.
Yeah.
And the only way to do that is to roll that dice, go out on your own and make something happen. And I'm proud of you for, we're both about 3 or 4 years into the business. So the fact that we're still here is huge, is amazing. What would you say to somebody who's considering starting their own business, but might be a little hesitant to because of those things that we mentioned, money and, all that sort of stuff?
Yeah, I think starting your own business is not for everyone, but I think trying is for everyone. I think if you think about your life, you only live one time. And do you want to be 80 years old thinking, man, it would have been nice to have my own business, but if you never tried, thinking about worst case scenario, well, you tried. If things didn't work, you can always go back. Corporate America will always take you. Always. So the downside is not that bad. It's not that bad.
It's really not. And of course, one of the things I say whenever people ask me this is there's a chance that you might not make enough money, right?
Sure.
There's a chance you might not be able to pay the mortgage. That's a real thing. And it's definitely something you should consider. But there's just as good of a chance you make more money than you made before.
Oh, yeah.
There's just as much chance that you make 5 times as much money as you were making before.
Oh, yeah.
And you own your own business and have this great asset and you're living the lifestyle that you want to. Isn't that worth taking that risk?
Oh my gosh, 100%. I think one of the biggest things that I enjoy is the autonomy of doing whatever you want.
Yeah.
You own your decisions, your successes, your failures. You take risk, but you're not waiting for approval. You're not asking somebody. You're not following somebody else's plans. You always have the clients, the marketplace that dictate a lot of things, but it's still the level of autonomy and freedom. It's amazing.
That is really great. And one other thing I wanted to say real quick before we kind of wrap up here is that, you are an immigrant. I'm the son of an immigrant. Yep. So I very much identify with the journey that you're on here in not only trying to establish a better life for yourself, but also create a better one for your children and the next of kin. And I just see you living out that life on your own terms, with your own business, with your own podcast, and bringing your unique skills, perspectives, talents, not only to the marketplace of architecture and design in the built environment, but also to our community here. Yeah. This wonderful, rich community of people and entrepreneurs we have here in Charlotte. You're just a shining example of all that, in my opinion. So I just wanted to say that on record.
Thank you.
For your listeners, so they know, the kind of guy you are. So we I could sit here and talk all day.
I know.
Long about all different sorts of topics, and I know that we have, and we will probably again in the future. But I wanted to wrap up this episode, your 50th episode of the Power of Design podcast, by asking you a very simple yet very complex question, and that is, what does the power of design mean to you?
The power of design means to me that we have the ability, the power, and the right to create a life on our own. And design is creation, and I see design as a process, right? You have an idea that you want to achieve something. It could be a plan, a business, a dream, a building, a website, and then you start creating a roadmap to get there, some kind of blueprint, and then you start accumulating the resources to get there. And there is no certainty that's going to be realized and you're going to do it. But going through the process, to me, that's the power of design, right? There are steps that you follow. And I always say that my mission in life is to inspire and motivate people to pursue their full potential. And it's the inspiration to pursue it. Some people will achieve it and exceed it. Some people may not. But the journey, that design journey, it's always there. And I always like to use that because it transcends, ideas, form, end result, construction. I see design is everything. I can design a contract, a relationship, an idea, a building. To me, it's always the same process.
Jack Ossa of the Power of Design podcast and Ossa Studio. Thanks so much for your time today.
Thank you, Andy. Appreciate that. Thank you for listening to the Power of Design podcast. Remember to rate and review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. Find out more about Jack and Ossa Studio at ossastudio.com. and follow us on Instagram at The Power of Design Podcast. Thank you.